We're with William Ramsay today, Deputy Secretary Director of International Energy Agency, IEA. Mr. Ramsay, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Tell us what IEA is and how we go about getting off the dependence of foreign oil.
Well, IEA was created some 34 years ago in response to the Arab oil embargo, basically created to deal with energy security of our members. We're a club of member governments, the United States, Japan, a lot of Europe. And our focus has shifted over the years from just dealing with oil import embargoes to security of energy, meaning the availability on a dependable basis of clean, affordable energy for more and more people, which means peoples of South Asia, Africa, elsewhere. How do we create the policy environment that stimulates that kind of energy flow? What can we do to influence how the energy is consumed so that it's consumed more cleanly? What can we do to diversify the sources of energy so that our dependence on one source or another is limited? Can we reduce our vulnerability to imported energy? To some extent we can, but not totally. And to bring policy advice to our member countries as to how they might set about that.
When the Americans talk about energy, we usually tend to think about gasoline because we are so dependent on gasoline just for our automobiles alone. Then our secondary thought is electricity. So we have two things. How do we actually get off the dependence of gasoline? And Europeans are doing it with diesel. How do you see Americans getting off the dependence of gasoline all by itself?
Yeah, we will not get off the dependence on gasoline. We can reduce our dependence on gasoline. We can do things by increasing the efficiency of our cars. We can do things by shifting to diesel over time. Diesel fuels are getting much better. We have an ultra-low sulfur fuel introduced in the States now that is going to be very close to the kind of standard we want to have, increasing the numbers of diesel cars. Americans haven't really encountered the European diesel. It's a zippy car. It's got spunk. It's got reaction. It's
got
nice,
great miles per gallon.
Great miles per gallon, but it's a fun car to drive. It's no longer these sluggish old things that groan and sputter in the night. It's a good car. So take a look at them. There are also some options in terms of hybrids. There are options in terms of hydrogen, but much further into the distance. That's not going to happen easily, quickly. Infrastructure problems, technology problems. There are lots of ways that we can reduce the extent to which we're exposed, in the transport sector in particular, to imported oil. The ethanol option is another one. It has worked in Brazil. We're trying it out in the U.S. Corn ethanol is not as good as sugar ethanol, but biofuels over time can provide another option.
Is cellulosic ethanol as good as the Brazilian sugar ethanol?
Cellulosic ultimately will be better, and it'll require less arable land and less quality in the arable land. But the technologies are not ready. That one is probably 20, 25 years before it really begins to penetrate the transportation mix. In the meantime, we can work on the technologies and the costs of oilseed ethanols, grain ethanols, corn and so forth, sugar ethanols, and introduce them into our mix, probably not much more than 5 to 10%, but that's still an important contribution.
Harold McFarland is the head of the Idaho National Laboratory, the nuclear labs up in Idaho, and he gave me some statistics. He says the population will grow by 27% by 2030. A third of the world population is under-reserved by electricity, and energy is the fuel of national prosperity. 3 billion people if they are raised to the Korean and Australian level of the world, it will take double that amount of the world's energy consumption. How are we going to meet all this?
Pretty good question. The demographics are very interesting here because lots of parts of the world are growing still rather rapidly. OECD countries perhaps less, US perhaps less. But if you consider current energy consumption, it is largely consumed by the 2 or 2.5 billion people who have enough money to buy into commercial energy services. Maybe 1.5 billion people don't have any commercial energy whatsoever, and another 1.5 billion has some limited access. But basically, the majority of energy is consumed by 2.5 billion people. How do you incorporate those other 3.5 or 4 billion people who want the same that we have? They want a car, they want a refrigerator, they want a television. There's no reason why they shouldn't have one. We're going to have to consume energy differently. Because if all those people consumed energy the way we do, we're going to get our feet wet and we're not going to be able to breathe. It has to be through efficiency. It has to be through technology. It has to be through greater attention to lifestyle and how we consume energy. I don't think any democratic government will ever convince its people to live a less high-quality life by cutting back on energy. But how you consume that energy can vary a great deal in our buildings, our houses, our commercial spaces, in terms of whether we go by car or whether we take a bus, the kind of car we drive, the temperature we keep the house, various of these things that we can do and do relatively easily, which we haven't done up until now because it hasn't been high on our consciousness, or it is not something that really costs us a great deal. We don't pay attention to the price of gas. Maybe we fuss, but we still drive. We don't cut back.
Mr. Ramsay, thank you for your time today.
It's been my pleasure.